My name is Sheila Corona. Welcome to Sassy Seer Sheila and New Light Streaming Love, as this will be seen on both channels. It is very rare that Jason reaches out to me and asks me specifically to record something. And this is one of those that he has asked me to record for him. And I always do my best to get to that as quickly as I can. And so, without further ado, this is Palestine Was Not a Myth by Jason Gray. Written 7/8 2026, so July 8th, which was just yesterday, 2026. History does not begin when an empire draws a new border. There are very few subjects I deliberately avoid. For years, I have stayed away from political arguments, partisan battles, and ideological wars. Not because I lack opinions, but because I have always believed that once people become emotionally invested in a political identity, genuine conversation often gives way to tribal loyalty. I've never wanted to contribute to more noise. My interest has always been in truth, wherever it leads, whether it confirms what I already believe or completely dismantles it. There comes a point when remaining silent becomes its own form of participation. The history of Palestine and Israel has become so saturated with slogans, selective memory, propaganda, and emotional manipulation that many people now speak with absolute certainty about events they have never seriously studied. And I totally get him on this. I've actually said many times myself that I feel as though too many people have absolutely no clue about what the truth is in regards to those two things. And it's so muddied and so much misinformation, disinformation, all of that has been because of one man's idea and another man's desire to have that idea be out there and things like that I don't all I knew for sure was that I don't know enough about it to speak on it at all myself. So I like what he says here, and I'm going to repeat it. The history of Palestine and Israel has become so saturated with slogans, selective memory, propaganda, and emotional manipulation that many people now speak with absolute certainty about events they have never seriously studied. Claims are repeated so often that they become accepted as fact without anyone ever asking to see the original documents, the maps, the census records, the diplomatic correspondence, or the historical archives. I can no longer remain silent. Not because I expect everyone to agree with me, quite the opposite. In fact, I challenge you not to agree with me. I challenge you to investigate every claim made in this writing for yourself. Read the Ottoman records. Read the Balfour Declaration in its entirety. Read the League of Nations mandate. Read the British Cabinet papers. Read the United Nations documents. Read historians whose conclusions differ from one another. Compare sources. Question everything, including me. If after honestly examining the historical record, not social media posts, not political talking points, not edited clips, but the original evidence, you can demonstrate that the central historical claims presented here are incorrect, then I will publicly acknowledge it and gladly correct my understanding. This is how truth should work. It should never fear investigation. It should never demand blind loyalty. It should never require censorship. Truth welcomes scrutiny because it has nothing to hide. So, before you react, before you become angry, before you decide what you think this writing is going to say, make yourself one promise. Follow the evidence wherever it leads, even if it leads somewhere unexpected, especially if it does. History is not rewritten by repeating a slogan often enough. It is not erased because it has become politically inconvenient. It is not altered because a government, a movement, or an ideology wishes the past had unfolded differently. History survives. It survives in maps. It survives in archives. It survives in census records. It survives in land deeds. It survives in church registries. It survives in Ottoman tax records. It survives in family photographs. It survives in graveyards whose stones were carved generations before modern political arguments ever existed, and above all, it survives in people. One of the most repeated claims of the modern era is that Palestine never existed. The statement is repeated with absolute certainty. It is shared across social media, repeated in political speeches, turned into slogans, accepted by millions who have never examined the historical record for themselves. Not because it is politically convenient, but because it is what the documents actually show. Oh, I'm sorry, I missed it. Missed a step there. The true historical record tells a far more complex story. Not because it is politically convenient, but because it is what the records actually show. History deserves better than propaganda. Whether that propaganda comes from governments, activists, religious movements, or empires, the truth must be allowed to stand on its own. Before Israel, there was Palestine. Long before the State of Israel declared independence on May 14th, 1948, the land was widely known as Palestine. Not by one civilization, by many. The name has deep historical roots stretching back through centuries of Greek, Roman, Byzantine, Islamic, Crusader, Ottoman, and European usage. Under the Ottoman Empire, which governed the region from the early 16th century until the First World War, the area was administered through several districts rather than as a single sovereign nation state. This point matters because critics often confuse two entirely different ideas. They ask, quote, was Palestine an independent sovereign state before 1948? The historically accurate answer is no. Neither were many places that later became modern nations. Modern Syria did not yet exist as an independent state. Modern Jordan did not. Modern Iraq did not. Modern Lebanon did not. Their present political borders were themselves products of the collapse of the Ottoman Empire and subsequent European mandates. The absence of an independent sovereign state does not mean a land, a people, or an identity did not exist. Scotland existed long before the modern United Kingdom. Kurdistan exists as a cultural and historic homeland despite not existing as an independent state. Identity is not created only when diplomats sign papers. Palestine was a recognized geographic and administrative region. Its inhabitants farmed it, built homes upon it, raised children there, buried generations there, prayed there, loved there, argued there, worked there, died there. History did not begin in 1948. The people who lived there. By the late 19th century, the overwhelming majority of Palestine's population consisted of Arabic-speaking Muslims and Christians. There was also a long-established Jewish community living in cities such as Jerusalem, Hebron, Safed, and Tiberias. These Jewish communities had deep historical roots in the land. They were part of Palestine's social fabric. Beginning in the late 19th century, however, a new political movement emerged in Europe: Zionism. Political Zionism developed in response to rising anti-Semitism, persecution, exclusion, and repeated violence against Jewish communities, particularly in Eastern Europe. Its central idea was that Jewish people required a national homeland where they could exercise self-determination and live in safety. For many Zionists, that homeland was Palestine, the ancestral land deeply connected to the Jewish history, religion, and identity. Understanding this history is essential. Jewish aspirations for safety and national self-determination were real. The tragedy is that these two national movements increasingly collided under the influence of imperial politics. The empire enters the story. Everything changed during the First World War. As the Ottoman Empire weakened, Britain began planning the future of territories it expected to control after the war. Then, On 2nd November 1917, Britain issued one of the shortest political documents with one of the longest historical shadows, the Balfour Declaration. Only 67 words. Those 67 words altered the course of the Middle East. The declaration announced British support for, quote, the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, end quote. Those words are quoted constantly. Far less attention is usually given to what followed. The declaration also stated that nothing should prejudice, quote, the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine. Those, quote, non-Jewish communities were not a tiny minority. They were the overwhelming majority of the population, and yet they were not identified by name. They were not described as Palestinians. They were defined only by what they were not Jewish. The declaration also protected the political status of Jews living in other countries, but did not explicitly recognize the political rights or right to self-determination of the Arab majority living in Palestine. Even later, British governments acknowledged that this omission became one of the declaration's deepest flaws. A promise made without the consent of those who lived there. This is perhaps the most extraordinary feature of the entire episode. Britain was promising support for a national home in a territory it did not yet fully control. It was making commitments concerning people who were not represented during the negotiations. The Arab population of Palestine had no seat at the table when their future was being discussed. Empires often behave this way. Borders were drawn in distant offices. Communities became bargaining chips. Entire societies discovered that their future had already been negotiated by people thousands of kilometers away. The people living in Palestine did not wake up one morning and collectively agree to become part of an imperial experiment. History happened to them. After the war, when the First World War ended, the Ottoman Empire collapsed. Britain received the League of Nations mandate for Palestine. The Balfour Declaration became incorporated into that mandate. Jewish immigration increased substantially during the following decades, driven both by Zionist aspirations and by intensifying anti-Semitism in Europe. At the same time, Palestinian Arabs increasingly feared that they would lose political control over the land in which they formed the majority. Violence escalated, distrust deepened, revolts erupted, repression followed. The conflict that continues today did not appear overnight. It developed through years of competing national aspirations, colonial administration, political failures, fear, and violence. The shadow of the Holocaust. Then came one of humanity's darkest chapters, the Holocaust. 6 million Jews were asymmetrically murdered by Nazi Germany and its collaborators. No discussion of Israel's creation is historically honest if it ignores this catastrophe. The Holocaust transformed international opinion. It intensified support for a Jewish state. It accelerated decisions that had already been developing for decades. When Britain announced it would end its mandate, the United Nations proposed partition. The proposal was accepted by many Jewish leaders and rejected by many Arab leaders. War followed. Israel declared independence in May 1948. Neighboring Arab states invaded. The conflict expanded dramatically. During that war, hundreds of thousands of Palestinians fled or were expelled from their homes. For Palestinians, this became the Nakba, the catastrophe. For Israelis, the same period marked the successful establishment and survival of their new state after generations of persecution. Both histories are real. Neither cancels the other. History is not a zero-sum game. Too often, public debate demands impossible choices. If you acknowledge Jewish history, some assume you deny Palestinian history. If you acknowledge Palestinian suffering, others assume you deny Jewish suffering. History does not require that choice. A mature understanding is capable of holding more than one truth at the same time. Jewish historical connection to the land is real. Palestinian historical connection to the land is real. The Holocaust happened. The Nakba happened. The State of Israel came into existence in 1948. Palestinian society existed before 1948. None of these facts erase the others. The dangers of erasure. Every conflict eventually produces two battles. The one is fought on the ground. The other is fought in the memory. The second battle often lasts longer. If a people can be convinced they never existed, their losses no longer matter. Their villages become invisible. Their cemeteries become anonymous. Their photographs become curiosities. Their grandparents become myths. History becomes easier to rewrite than to remember, but archives remain. Maps remain. Records remain. Families remain. Memory remains. History deserves better. Real history is rarely simple. It resists slogans. It refuses propaganda. It rarely grants complete innocence to any empire, movement, or government. Its responsibility is not to comfort us. Its responsibility is to tell us what happened as faithfully as possible. That responsibility belongs to all of us because once history becomes nothing more than a political weapon, the past is no longer being remembered. It is being recruited. Palestine was not invented after the fact. It was a historical land. It was home to communities that lived there for generations. It existed under Ottoman administration. It existed under the British Mandate. Then, in 1948, the State of Israel was established. Understanding that sequence does not diminish Israel's existence today, nor does recognizing Israel's existence require denying Palestinian history. History is strongest when it is complete. It is weakest when it demands amnesia. And let me just say this, there's a lot of that going on all over the place. That business of trying to change the name of this, that, or the other and rip down statues and all of that, to me, that is so that folks don't remember. And the truth is if you don't remember your history, you are absolutely going to repeat it rather than seeing how far we've come. Yeah, don't allow that. Understanding the sequence does not diminish Israel's existence today, nor does recognizing Israel's existence require denying Palestinian history. History is strongest when it is complete. It is weakest when it demands amnesia. The archives still speak. The maps still exist. The families still remember, and history remains what it has always been, far larger than any slogan. When I was just a young boy, I remember watching a documentary about the lives of ordinary Palestinians. I was too young to understand the politics. I did not know the history. I could not have explained the Balfour Declaration, the British Mandate, partition, or the countless diplomatic failures that had led to that moment. What I understood was something much simpler. I watched farmers trying to reach their own fields. I watched families waiting at checkpoints. I watched ordinary people endure delays, questioning, restrictions, and uncertainty as they tried to go about the basic routines of everyday life. I remember wondering how anyone could live like that day after day. Those images never left me. As I grew older, I began reading more history, not to confirm what I already believed, but to understand how human beings ever arrive at circumstances like these. The deeper I studied, the more I realized that history is rarely as simple as the slogans shouted by either side. It is layered. It is painful. It is filled with competing narratives, genuine trauma, broken promises, fear, survival, and generations of decisions whose consequences continue to echo today. Nothing in this writing is written out of hatred for Jewish people. Anti-Semitism is a poison that has brought immeasurable suffering throughout history and deserves to be rejected wherever it appears. Nor is this written to deny Israel's right to exist or the very real suffering that Israeli families have endured through war, terrorism, and violence. It is written because I believe that every human life possesses equal dignity, because no child should inherit endless conflict, because no family should become invisible simply because history became politically inconvenient, and because I have never forgotten the faces I saw on that screen as a boy. Long before I knew the names of politicians, long before I understood the treaties, long before I had ever opened an archive, those people stopped being an argument. They became human beings. And once you truly see another human being, it becomes very difficult to pretend they never were. Jason Gray. Wow, Jason. That is so beautifully written. And I'll tell you what else I see back here where you say, because no family should become invisible simply because history became politically inconvenient. We have to remember what has gone before so that we don't do it again. There's no reason. There is plenty of room on this planet. If people would stop trying to control everything, if the leaders would stop trying to say, that's mine. Over this last week and a half, here in the United States, I have borne witness to America through the eyes of Europeans that were here for the World Cup. And it's been the most beautiful thing that I've ever laid my eyes on. And it's not because it's just America, it's humanity. It is who we all are at our core. And he's right. They stopped being an argument and they became human beings. And when you can look at someone and truly see who they are, the politics is irrelevant. Thank you, Jason. This is beautiful, and I appreciate you so much. Until we meet again, my friends, be well.